So I want to talk a little bit about a subject that a few heathens that I've known, a few pagans that I've known, have talked about and have had a lot of thoughts about. Some angry, some critical, some not, and some just kind of in between. And if you're a heathen, you might have heard these words talked about in some place you might have been to or read on. You'll hear this a lot on Reddit and more online spaces than you will in the real world, which I think kind of drives a lot of the arguments that have been had about this particular practice. And this particular practice is called hearth cult. Now, for those of you who might not know what hearth cult is a kind of domestic worship that has come about in heathenry not that long ago. I want to say, see, if I had to guess or think off the top of my head without looking at anything, I'd say about 3, 4 years ago, if that is when, or at least that's when I heard of it. Now, I could be wrong. This could have started a lot earlier here. But hearth cult, as I have come to know it and as I've seen it on the internet, started, I'd say, about 4 or 5 years ago, give or take. Give or take here. And what it is, as I said before, it is a kind of domestic worship. It is a very particular, very ordered form of domestic worship that has found its way into heathenry, where you petition a gatekeeper god and use that, and along with a very precise ritual format to conduct an offering and hold your whatever service or offering or bloat to the gods. Hearth cult is not, it's not bloat, it's not symbol. This is something different. This is something completely different that a number of heathens put together. And that kind of reveals a lot of the core of this. And before I go any further, I want to get this clear to anyone who might be listening to this, watching this. I'm not saying hearth cult is invalid. Far from it. I find it very valid. It's very cool. If you do this, mazel tov. Have at it, baby. It gives you satisfaction. Sky's the limit. It's all yours, man. What I have a problem with, though, is the people who get very dogmatic about this practice. Like it's the end-all, be-all. Which, in my opinion, cheapens it. Because what hearth cult is a syncretic fusion of a lot of different elements. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And you're probably wondering, Osric, what do you mean a syncretic fusion of different elements? That's the point here. See, when it comes to heathenry and domestic worship, there's not a whole lot of information that we have about what heathens in the past did when it came to domestic worship. We have some information about housewites or hofgodas, as they're called in Anglo-Saxon tradition, and I forget the Norse word for what they would be called. But all the housewites and house spirits and how people might, do any small offerings in their home. That information is lost. We have some little bits here and there, some things that we found in certain archaeological finds that kind of point to some domestic worship, some votive things that we found here and there. But largely, what heathens did in the space of their own home, we don't know about. We barely know a few scant details on what a bloat is and what sumbul is and what certain things went down in certain temples. Those we have information on, which still isn't all that much to begin with, so we've kind of had to build out from that. And thusly, when it comes to domestic worship, we've had to build out from that. And some heathens have gotten on a kick with Proto-Indo-European ideas, or rather, what certain scholars and certain writers have theorized about Proto-Indo-European spirituality and what that is, and have taken that upon themselves to kind of look at other cultures that were in the area where heathens were and kind of, extrapolate, well, Since these share some similarities here, we could kind of build a bridge here and combine practices. Because there's nothing that says that those things didn't happen. Because there's a lot of interactions that were had between Rome and the Gauls and the Goths and the Danes. And we also have the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, the Visigoths. A lot of heathen peoples ran into other people around the areas of Europe because Europe's a big fucking place. You're going to run into a lot of different cultures. A lot of different tribes going to bump up each other. And as tribes do, they share things. Sometimes willingly, sometimes not. And sometimes things just kind of fall together here. Look up Religio Interpretado for Rome. And go from there. Which is kind of where Hearth Cult kind of comes from. Because the people who put this together initially were also syncretists with Roman worship and Roman polytheism. Which is why when you look at Hearth Cult, if you know anything about Mediterranean religions, you're going to start noticing some things that are very, very similar. Which is one of the criticisms that some people have had with Hearth Cult, in that Hearth Cult in and of itself is not really heathen in origin. It's more Mediterranean than anything else. Now, it's being applied into a heathen format, but its origin is not heathen, so people are very unsure of whether or not this fits quite right. And I can understand that, because Hearth gods, well, heathenry doesn't quite have that. I mean, Frigg is goddess who has domain in the home, and the hearth is part of the home. But she's not technically a hearth goddess, if you will. Like, say, Hestia, or Vesta, or Brigg is. Those are gods that have more vested interest in the hearth. So, it's not quite a one-to-one. And also, each region, whether it's Rome or anything involving any Hellenic spirituality or anything that comes from any different tribe in Europe, each one has their own different ideas and understandings of how religion works, how their cosmology works. So you really have to be aware of that, or at least as much as we have record of to know about that, when you're putting together any sort of ritual where you're trying to build outwards. And people who do reconstructive practices, we kind of know that. That's kind of par and parcel of what we do. We have to that's something you know. It's background knowledge that you have to know. Okay. But going back to Hearth Cult in and of itself, it's not bad, but not everybody does Hearth Cult. Not everybody calls out to a gatekeeper god. Not everybody does water offerings with whatever offerings. Some people have a very simplistic way of doing their offerings. I myself, how I do offerings, I'm normally outside, because in what sources that I've read, libations and such were poured into the ground. And that's what I do. I pour my offerings directly into the earth, depending on what I'm offering. If it's usually a strong alcohol or something in the South, here in the United States of America, there's a bit of a rough history in terms of alcohol. And not something that gets the best results from the spirits of the land that are here. Now, me being also Native American, the reaction is different. From what I have seen and heard from other people who are more white in terms of their ancestry when they give offerings. So maybe I'm getting something different here. Or maybe because since I'm Native American, I don't have that kind of baggage that, my fellow heathens who are European in their ancestry have, in terms of, things that come down, because spirits, their memory and how they work is very different from people. Their memory is very different. And the weight of what your ancestry has done, it matters. It has a weight, and it filters into your offerings and how certain beings will interact with you. Which is why, which is a part of another critique that people have had against Hearth Cult, because since this isn't exactly how their ancestors did it and how heathens might have done it, they feel like it might not be all that appropriate because heathens, land spirits and beings that interact with in heathen religion may not recognize it and may not accept it, which I'm kind of in between the fence when it comes to whether or not that's valid or not. It's an odd argument to be had, but I can see some point of it. However, that assumes that spirits are static from several thousand years ago to now, and I'm sorry, I don't buy into that for a half a second. In my experience, does not lead any credence to that assumption whatsoever. But getting off of that little runoff here, that's how some people kind of view it. And like I said, Hearth Cult is fine to me. I have no problem with it. But we do have to be honest that it is a syncretic fusion. It's a syncretic blend of different things into heathenry, which honestly, it's not that bad of a thing. Because way back when, people blended things together all the time. So, not that big a thing to get steamed at. But to those of you who say, Hearth Cult is the main way and you're not a real heathen if you don't do that, people have been doing heathenry long before Hearth Cult came about. And there have been people who've been doing heathenry in practice in one way or another without you really realizing that they've been doing that for a lot longer than you are aware of. And Hearth Cult is kind of part of that. They include domestic worship, but it's different. It's a bit different. Look up Germanic folklore and how they treated house spirits before Christianity became really, kind of really forced into things. Look at how they treated the house kobold, for example, or any other spirit in that land. You treat it well, you give it respect, good things would happen to you. If you didn't, well, bad things would soon follow. So something to keep in mind. But how you worship and how you do your own domestic worship is really up to you. Because I'm going to be the first person to say it. You do you. What do you feel is appropriate? When you give an offering, or you want to give an offering, what do you feel is appropriate? Do you want to take the offering that you're giving, and if it's a physical offering, like say a piece of food or a drink or what have you, and leave it on an altar, or do you want to place it outside on something that's a natural altar, which is usually called a vey, or leave it outside to the elements where the powers that be, the mighty gods and spirits, can take hold of that? That's up to you. If you want to leave it inside, up to you. If you want to burn it, up to you. If you want to bury it, up to you. If you want to do Hearth Cult, up to you. If you want to do something different, up to you. Whatever choice that you feel is best, that gives you the best connection to the gods, you do that. Power to you. And in short and in closing, never let anyone else shout down how you do your religion, because at the end of the day, your religious practice is between you and the gods, and the powers that come between you and the gods. That's it. Everyone else, they might have their opinion, but no man trumps a god. End of story. And y'all have a good night.